Uh,
Sorry, go ahead.
so we hope that a lot of people come to the in-person meeting, but again, we will have at least some of it online, and we'll use again the Hoover platform so that the speakers that are recorded will be playable, and there will be meetups. And it also allows us not to have to print out a program because everything will be on your tablet or on your phone. Although we will print up the schedule for the day on a piece of paper for people who don't have those things. But it'll change the way we do meetings, but we will have several different kinds of workshops throughout the day. And it will be at UNF, University of North Florida. And the campus there has almost all native plants in the landscaping. And we held it there in 2013, and I was on the committee for the conference that year too. So
that was great. I remember that 2013 meeting.
Yeah.
2015, you said? What was
13?
2013. Yeah.
2013. Yeah. So I hope you all come, because I know that I have missed meeting everybody, because the FNPS people are my tribe. But I hope you can come to the conference.
Right.
One way or another.
Yes. So thanks for that reminder. And the weekend, it's the weekend of May 18th, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. All right. And Sean Patton, take it away. He's got Ecoflora information.
Howdy, everybody. Sean Patton here with the Selby Gardens Sarasota Manatee Ecoflora project. We have 2 hikes coming up this month to help get people out in nature to observe Florida's native plants in the wild. We've actually been able to add almost 76 new native plants to Sarasota Manatee's county records through this, including new ones on Lido Beach, surprisingly. We found another morning glory, the white morning glory, that was not noted on that beach. We're finishing up the Asters EcoQuest this month, and next month we're doing the Tillandsia Tally 2, and that's going to be a lot of fun if you like air plants and epiphytes. And on the 27th at 9 a.m. to noon, we're going to Curry Creek BioBlitz, and on the 29th, which is a Friday, we're doing the Little Manatee River South Fork Tract, which is a very understudied tract. So if anyone's interested in coming out, I'll put that information in the chat. It's, as always, totally free for people to come out, and they're guided hikes by some Selby botanists and staff, so you can learn a lot about the cool native plants around us.
So what date are you doing South Fork? Because Sarah Noah loves that. That used to be our like adopted place when it was much better managed. So
that would be the 29th.
29th of October. Okay, thank you.
And we are trying to do 2 a month, so you can always find that out on the Selby website or on the iNaturalist page for the Sarasota Manatee Ecoflora project. We list all the hikes there. We're doing 1 or 2 a month.
Yeah, so if you're curious, you could just, I'm sure you can Google Sarasota Manatee Ecoflora and it will take you to the right place. Yeah. Okay, Kathy Benz has some information about clean water.
Yeah, I'm one of the ambassadors, which is a regional representative for the Right to Clean Water initiative that's going for the state amendment to the Constitution. And you may have seen information about this initiative starting off as FL5. I'm not sure whether you all have seen any of it, but the pandemic has changed the availability of gatherings in order to get petitions signed. So at this point, we're punting and we're going for reinitiating the initiative in February for the 2020 election, which will give us 2 years in order to gather the numbers of petition signatures that are needed. The number is almost 900,000 that we have to collect.
2022 election, you mean, right?
No, 2024 is what we're doing.
2024. Okay. You said 2020. So you knew it wasn't that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
All right. Thank you. So, yeah, so Erica Timmerman is on her way back from Wyoming. She's our president, and we need a new one. If anyone is interested, please let us know. We'd love to have somebody who's not as busy as me or Tom run the meetings, and Erica is going to be stepping down. We also have a couple other, if you check our newsletter, we have a couple other positions open. One being the field trip coordinator, which is a behind the scenes registration kind of thing. And I will be happy to train you on Google Forms and Google Sheets to get that moving. And I think that is, the field trip is full, and we have a waiting list. We're talking about, Pam said we may be able to accommodate a few more than the 20 we said. So we may, if you're on the waiting list currently and you got a notice today, we may be able to accommodate you. We're going to decide that. And we'll let you know in the next few days. But if you haven't signed up, we are like over full. And so got to be quick. And I think that's it. Sean has put in the chat, if you have questions about the BioBlitz, he's got the information in the chat. And we will take Q&A after the talk with Ginny. We'll take a Q&A, and you can put that in the chat, or you can raise your hand using reactions at the bottom of your screen. There's a raise hand option. But I will make sure to find anybody who has a question, either chat or hand raised, and we'll make sure everybody gets a chance. As far as logistics, I think that's it mainly, and everybody's doing great. We've all been on Zoom so long, we know what to do. Keep your video on or off is fine, but your audio off. And actually, while the speaker's speaking, if you would turn off your video, and we'll just put it back on. I'm going to put, I don't have the option. So what I would suggest when Ginny talks is to go to the view, which is at the top of your screen. There's a view option with a bunch of little boxes. If you go to speaker view, then you'll have a little less distraction. Ginny is going to share her screen, and we'll have a nice presentation. But if you go to speaker view, then it will be just Ginny showing on the sidebar. All right, so without further ado, I will introduce our wonderful speaker, Ginny Stibolt. She's an author and a great native botanist, and really active with Native Plant Society and getting native plants knowledge out to folks around our state. And she's going to tell you about some of her books, and she's going to even have one available for you to buy afterwards. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Ginny Stibolt.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. I'll share my screen. There we go. All right. I have written four of my gardening books have been for Florida, and they've been published by University Press of Florida. The Climate-Wise Landscaping book is a different take for me. I'm the co-author with Sue Reed, who's in Massachusetts, and this came out in 2018, but with all of the climate activity that's going on right now, it seems to have been perfectly placed, and that we have it out at this point. And I would like to explain one thing about the cover. This stock photo here of somebody's yard is what our publisher New Society Press out in British Columbia insisted upon, but Sue and I said, but wait, there's no natives in there. And they said, oh, but it's so beautiful and people will like it. We said, well, at least on the bottom, at least let us have a native plant with a pollinator. So we got the trillium here, and the pollinator is the tiniest little pollinator that you could imagine. So I just wanted to explain about that we would have preferred something with a more native yard, but that didn't happen. But what Sue and I did is we did not debate climate change at all. And one of the things that we were really pleased about is that Doug Tallamy did the forward for our book. And here's a photo I took of him at one of our FNPS meetings several years ago. So Sue Reed and myself. Sue is a landscape architect. And so she called me up and asked me if I could work with her on this book because I'm a gardener and a botanist, so our backgrounds were different. So she has a lot of design skills, and up in Massachusetts things are a bit different, but we were thrilled that Doug Tallamy agreed to write the forward to the book, and he ended with this read this book carefully statement, which we were extremely pleased about. And while Dr. Tallamy looks like a sort of a nerd or something like that, he really is a superhero for native plant enthusiasts because he changed the narrative of native plants. So what I'll be talking about in this presentation is emphasizing things that you can do in your yard and in your community, and actions that are relevant to Florida rather than the broad reach that we did in the book. And one of the interesting things that happens when you start doing research for a book is that you end up being a more critical thinker. And there were some really interesting things that I didn't think about, and I'll discuss some of those as we go along. Just a different way of thinking about why do you save water, for instance, and that kind of thing. It just aimed the way we think about the problems that we have in being earth friendly in our landscapes. And one of the things that happens when you talk about climate change is that it is oh my gosh, this is terrible, it's a huge problem, there's nothing we can do, oh my gosh, it's a hand-wringing moment. But what we decided to do was take action. And this meme here about American junk mail came across my Facebook news feed a couple of years ago. And it says, oh my gosh, look at what junk mail is doing, and look at all this stuff, and look at all these numbers. But they're not asking people to do anything. There isn't anything like, say, well, unsubscribe, or be sure to recycle, or, at least the trees are a renewable resource and they could be planted again. So when we talk about hard topics like climate change and stuff like that, we need to get down to things that we can do, because otherwise it's just too depressing. So all of the actions, and there's hundreds of them in the book, have at least one of these missions. So one is to help our landscapes become more resilient. So in the future, when climate change continues, that our landscapes would be more likely to survive, and that our landscapes would help wildlife survive. So the pollinators and the birds would find some kind of sanctuary in our yards. And as Doug Tallamy has so eloquently stated, that even a few native plant areas in a small yard can make a total amount of difference for whether a bird survives or not, because a chickadee has to have so many caterpillars in order to have its clutch fledge. And then there are things that we can actually do to mitigate climate change, and trees, having more trees or preserving trees and planting trees is one of those actions. And we'll talk about why they are so important. I love this photo of this goldfinch. I took this in Lurie Garden in the center of Chicago in
Wow.
Millennium Park. And this is a mostly native garden that is never, that's not deadheaded. So the birds have something to eat. And we should try to do this in our yards as well. So in organizing the book, we have 10 sections or chapters, but we have sidebars for the science behind some of the ideas that we have. So the science parts are set aside and they have a different color background so that you can skip them if you want, but we wanted to put the science in there so that people who were unsure about why would we be asking people to do this or that, here is the background of why this would happen. And we did our sections in order of things that we can do most easily. So we started with lawns because lawns are the biggest effect you can have is to rethink your lawn. This is the easiest. It has the most impact on the planet if you rethink the lawn. So it saves you money, it saves water, and 30 to 60% of municipal water supplies are used in lawns. And it's the largest irrigated crop in the country by a whole lot. The second is corn, and the corn is only 1/4 of the acreage of lawns. So what can we do? Well, I still have a lawn, but what I have is a Freedom Lawn. So it's free from all these pesticides, and it's free from synthetic fertilizers. It's free from over irrigation, and we don't overseed it in the wintertime. We let it go dormant. So, and it's much smaller than it was. We have an 1.5 acre lot. It's much smaller than it was when we moved in. It's only about half as big as it was, but it still is presentable. And that's part of the challenge we have as native plant enthusiasts, is that we have neighbors. And so we need to think about what the neighbors see. But all these poisons kills the soil. And when you kill the soil, then it's bad for the grass. And so then they put synthetic fertilizers to keep the soil, to keep the grass artificially supported. And then they have to irrigate it. But meanwhile, the soil becomes dead. So when you have a Freedom Lawn, you end up with a lot of different kinds of plants in the mowed area. So, you need to reconsider what is a good looking lawn. So here I've got some St. John's wort, some dollarweed, I've got violets, I've got rain lilies, I've got asters, I've got toadflax, and actually this, and I thought this was a mowed toadflax, but it's something else now. That somebody informed me that this was not toadflax, but I do have toadflax that comes up every year. So I've got hundreds of different kinds of plants that grow in the mowed area. And again, doesn't get mowed from now until March when it starts to grow again. So it just goes into dormancy. So the lawns can support the wildlife. And also when you reduce the lawn, you want to think about how you are mowing it so that the person who is doing the mowing can just make a one clean sweep. So there'd be no vertical edges, nice flat area that the wheels can go up on so that you don't have to come back with power tools to finish off the job. And you'd want to replace the lawn with lots of different things that are more fun, like butterfly gardens and meadows, and anything would be a better habitat than a monoculture turf grass lawn. So that's where we started. And so the unpoisoned soil, the one without the pesticides, it stores more carbon, because the soil, actually on a global basis, soil sequesters 4 times more carbon than all of the terrestrial plants. Now, I'm not talking about the ocean, but terrestrial plants, all the rainforests, all the other forests, all our prairies, everything like that. The soil sequesters 4 times more carbon. So we need to keep our soil alive. And we do have a soil chapter in here as well. But when you stop poisoning, then things change. And reduced irrigation, we'll talk about water in a minute, but it saves energy and it helps save our water supply. And again, we can reduce the use of power tools. And clover is something that's often found in liberated lawns, and this is not a native clover, but one that used to be included in every seed for lawns. Clover was included because it's a legume and it helps fix the nitrogen and stuff like that, but somehow we got devoted to one type of grass. And we can switch our power tools from high pollution gas engines to battery powered tools, so that they're charged from the house, and in general the electricity energy from our house is much cleaner than the 2-cycle gas engines that are used in the lawn equipment, and so it's much quieter. So my husband has a chainsaw, he's got a leaf blower, he's got a hedge trimmer, and they all use the same battery. So he's got, I think, four different battery packs. So after a hurricane hit a couple of years ago, our little chainsaw was in high use, and he'd bring a couple of extra battery packs out with him so that he could change the battery out when he was working. Now, trees and shrubs are the bones of our landscape, and trees are tremendously important in a climate-wise landscape because they cool the air, they store the carbon, and we'll get to that in a minute. They stabilize the soil, and of course they support wildlife. This is a picture of a mature elm tree in Amherst, Massachusetts that did not get killed by the Dutch elm disease. So they've been doing studies on this elm tree to see if they can bring back our native elms that got killed off. So when you are picking trees to plant, you don't want to get a big tree. You want smaller specimens, because if you have a young tree that's a whip, it's never been topped, it's small, it will adjust much quicker to your yard, takes less water, it will start growing more quickly, and be much more likely to survive. And I've talked about this a lot, that underneath the lawn, underneath the tree, you don't have lawn, because lawns and trees are not good partners. I'm losing my voice. So here's a magnolia tree at a big box store, and you don't want to buy this tree, and there's several reasons. If you look here, you can see that it's been topped, and that means that there are now three leaders, and you'll have to prune it to pick one new leader. And trees that have been topped live shorter lives than ones that have not. And also in a big box store, it's probably not from Florida stock, it's probably from farther north. And it's too old. It's a 3-inch caliper, so 6 inches above the root flare. It'd be 3 inches in diameter. It's too big. So it's going to be pot bound. It's just a bad investment of time and money. And it has a large climate footprint compared to a much smaller tree. And when you plant a tree, and this is so against what we have been taught, you want to rinse all the growing medium. This is for container grown trees. You want to rinse away all that rich growing medium, all the fertilizer balls, all the rich pine bark and peat moss and all kinds of stuff that the tree was growing in. So you can find the circling roots, and you want to spread them out. You want to make sure that the root flare is above the soil level, and you don't add any amendments into the planting hole at all. No fertilizer, no compost, nothing at all except the lousy soil that's there. This is sort of a tough love for the tree, but the tree will adjust more quickly and the roots will go out. And you want the roots to go out, because if that happens, then you end up with a more drought tolerant tree and a more wind tolerant tree. And that's kind of important in Florida. If you leave all that rich growing medium in the planting hole, the roots will just stay there and coil around and around because it doesn't want to go out into the lousy soil in the outside area. And you can go to Linda Chalker Scott's informedgardener.com. And there's science papers on all kinds of horticultural myths, and one of them, maybe 2 of them, are on why rinsing the roots is the best idea. And there's good solid science that backs this up. So when you're planting a tree, get a small tree, an inch in diameter or less, one that hasn't been topped, and you'll find that it will adjust to your landscape much more quickly. Now, because you've rinsed the roots, you're going to have to irrigate it quite heavily. So you'd need 3 gallons of water a day for a 1-inch caliper tree for at least several weeks, or you can put in a drip irrigation system so that it gets a lot of irrigation. And you do not prune any trees at least a year after you plant it so that it can adjust. And because where does a tree get its energy? Gets it from the leaves. So just a quick aside there on how to plant a tree. And it's so against what other people have said, but it is scientifically sound. And this is why you want to get those circling roots taken care of. Now, this is not in Florida, this is in Northern California. So these copper beeches were planted, and you can still see the orange strings around here because they didn't want the tree to break up the sidewalk and the road, I guess, because this is not a very wide medium strip. So the people who planted it thought they probably did a good job. Look how beautiful they are, but the roots choked the tree. So that's why you want to get all the circling roots spread out so that they can go out and not kill itself. And these were probably 15 or 20 years after they were planted. So the people who planted them thought they did a good job, but no. All right, so trees and shrubs cool the landscape through transpiration and shade. And so you can maximize your strategies for where they're planted so that, and we talk about this. This is in New England. Actually, this is Sue Reed's house. So she's got serviceberry Amelanchier canadensis in front of her house. So in the summer, it casts shade on the south side of the house, but in the winter, it allows the sun to come in. And the biggest service of our forests is that they actually reduce the temperatures. So transpiration is the process where the water is soaked in through the roots, and then it's pulled up through the plant by suction of having less moisture outside of the tree than in the tree. So the stomata, or the pores on the leaves, is where the water is going. So a typical oak tree on a hot summer day will transpire about 400 gallons of water a day. And that's one reason you don't want lawn under a tree, because the tree is always going to win the contest for the water. But as the water in the tree converts from liquid to gas, which is water vapor, it reduces the ambient temperature by 585 calories if it's 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So that actual physical change from liquid in the plant to gas in the air reduces the heat. So when you walk in a forest, it's cool, not just because of the shade, but because of transpiration. So the transpiration process actually cools the atmosphere. And so if you get a whole forest, that's why it's so pleasant in the forest. And the water vapor that's released into the atmosphere in a forest becomes global. And when you cut down the forests, the rainforests and the other forests, then that water is not going into the air, and we have more severe droughts. So we need to have more forest areas. And we talk about this quite a bit in the book. Here's a quote from Paul Hawken in Drawdown. And water. So climate change can cause too little water through droughts, or too much water through heavy storms. So climate-wise landscapes need to deal with both situations. So you need to plan ahead for the water. Now, previously, before I started researching this book, I said, well, we have to save water because it's a limited resource and there's more and more people, and we need not to waste it so we can preserve our aquifers and stuff like that. But what my research showed, and I had to rethink, that the other part of the use of water is the huge amount of energy that's needed to extract, treat, and deliver the water to our taps with enough pressure so that we can take a shower. So that energy is also saved when you save water. So if you stop overwatering your lawn, you're also saving energy. And then you're also not having to mow so much, so you're saving energy. And the water is a limited resource, so we can have enough of it so that we can survive. So there's all kinds of ways to look at that. And when we plant our landscapes, we need more drought tolerant plants. This wonderful milkweed, the Pine Hills milkweed, has a waxy surface, and it's very beautiful, but it survives in very sandy, dry locations because it has designed itself so that it can tolerate the drought. And this landscape here is in Texas. But why I included it here is because what's interesting is that the plants are closely spaced. So we're not mulching the heck out of everything. We're putting plants close together. Somebody on Facebook said that is called cramscaping. So you put a lot of plants together and you allow them to go to seed, and then it becomes a self-sustaining landscape. And you would group your plants by moisture preference. So here is in a garden, this is actually in the High Line. So they had their swamp mallows and their horsetails in the same area, and this would need more moisture. And it was also near a water fountain, and the water fountains in the Highlines don't have drains. So all the water that you don't drink ends up going into the garden, which is kind of cool. So you want to design the landscape so that if you have a moist spot, that all your moisture loving plants are in one area, so you're not having to irrigate it a lot of different places. And you may want to switch to micro emitters when, especially if you're growing food at low pressure, so that you can irrigate the roots. It doesn't go into the air, it doesn't evaporate. And you want to adjust the irrigation to your new landscaping. This is the ridiculous landscape at Jack's NAS, which is a Naval Air Station base. And they took out a ratty looking lawn and they put in weed barrier cloth and mulch. But they didn't take the irrigation out. So they're watering the mulch, and it's been this way for years. So this is their end plan for this area, is mulch, and this is not what we want to do. It was much better having a ratty lawn, because it took less time, because there's still weeds that come up because they're watering the mulch. And you need a rain gauge, because precipitation in Florida is quite variable. So what you get is not necessarily what somebody in the next town gets. So that way you know how much you're getting. And I'm a big fan of rain barrels. I have 6. I used to have 7. One gave it up, but mostly I use them for irrigating my edible gardens and my containers. And also I use it for wetting mulch. And the reason, I mean, not mulch, but the compost. But the reason you want to use rain barrel water for your plants, both indoor and outdoor, is because there's no purifiers in it. So when you water a plant with tap water, it's got chlorine and other things in it that will kill the microbes in the soil. So in compost and in our soils, we want the microbes. So using rain barrel water is much better for the soil, and therefore much better for the plants. And there's all kinds of things that you can use this for. So yeah, we have 6 rain barrels, and right now, because we've had 1/10 of an inch of rain in all of October so far. And this isn't even a dry month. So the rain barrels are getting a little bit empty. So I'm waiting for rain. You can also put in dry wells, and we put in a big dry well, and this would absorb the water. So we want to sequester water. We don't want water going to run off into the storm drains and then into the nearest waterway, because that increases the pollution. So this is a big dry well that we dug because there was a big chunk of clay in between some beds, and it was standing water. So we bought these tubes with socks. We put in gravel in between. We covered them with weed barrier cloth. And this is the only reason that you'd want to use weed barrier cloth, is to keep gravel away from soil. It's not good for weeds. And so now, years later, we don't have a problem with the standing water in this area. Rain gardens and bioswales slow down the water, so it soaks into the soil and it doesn't go into the storm drains. And this is a bioswale that was built in Jacksonville. It was a huge deal. It was all kinds of things. If you go to the Riverkeeper, the St. John's Riverkeeper website, they have a video when they put it in. I was quite critical of it. I did a Palmetto article several years ago about it. They planted only one kind of tree, which is bald cypress. Now there's about 20 feet across here, but a bald cypress is just too big. They're going to get too big. It's already having to be trimmed from the sidewalk. It's going to get knees. They only had Yopon holly cultivar that's a male, so there's no berries, only one kind of bush, and then they had two kinds of bunching grasses. So there's not enough diversity in here, but still you want public-private projects like this, so that you slow down the water, you absorb the water into the soil before it goes into the drains. I did a small rain garden at my front porch. So when we moved in, it looked like this. And a year later, it looked like this. And I planted some ferns that I found that did extremely well. But then later I found out they were the tuberous sword ferns. So they're an invasive plant that I pulled out. Now I've got netted chain ferns and other ferns in there. But those sword ferns did really well. But when you keep the water on your property, that reduces the water pollution. So don't feed the algae. And here's a photo that I took in Singapore of a sidewalk cafe as early in the morning, so there weren't any customers. But these inverted umbrellas act as a gutter for this adjacent building. And so these pipes carry the water down to below the water level, and then this building uses the collected water to flush their toilets. So we need to think differently about our rainwater as not a waste product that we have to get rid of, but something that we can use. Just have to think a little differently. We talked about ecosystems, and I'm just going to go by here because you guys already know this. We need more native plants. We need to plant in groupings. We need to create layers and edges and wild patches and stick piles. It's amazingly important to provide the food for both the adult pollinators and also the larval stages. So milkweed for your monarchs, passion vines for your zebra longwings, and you want to be very rational about what you're planting so that you're feeding all stages of those pollinators. And we want to maximize the carbon in the soil by minimizing the disturbance and avoid the compacting. You want to build compost whenever you can. Now, I had this whole thing in the book about how does soil store the carbon anyway? Well, it ends up going back to photosynthesis. So we've got photosynthesis where a plant, a green plant, can take in carbon dioxide from the air, water from the soil, and with light from the sun, create sugars, and it gives off oxygen. And so that is the key to how plants capture the carbon. So this CO2, this carbon, is from the air. So every time, every day a plant lives and photosynthesizes, carbon is being taken out of the air. But then almost everything else in the planet, everything on the terrestrial side of the planet, does exactly the opposite with respiration, where we and fungi and the plants and all the organisms take the sugar and breathe in oxygen one way or another. We get energy for life, and we give off carbon dioxide and water. So these two formulas are exactly the opposite. So this caterpillar is eating the plant, and he is exhaling carbon dioxide and water. but he is converting the carbon as part of his body. So if you're a fan of Star Trek, Spock would have called us carbon-based life forms because we're all dependent upon this. Now, in some deep vents in the ocean, there's other organisms that can live off of the hydrogen sulfide vents, but almost everything else needs photosynthesis. And it takes a long time to form soil. And this is my left hand. In Costa Rica, in the rainforest, in the middle of a rainforest, it had been cut away for a road. The soil is amazingly thin in a rainforest because the metabolism, that whole ecosystem is so high and the rainfall is so high. And so the carbon washes out. And as climate changes, our soils are going to become more like the rainforest soils, with the microbes working faster and faster and the plants working faster and faster because there's more carbon dioxide and it's hotter and everything. And so our soils are going to become more like this. And so we need to take better care of our soil so that we end up with a thicker layer of soil. The erosion is also a big factor in the rainforest because there's so much rain. And we can reduce the soil disturbance by not doing seasonal plantings. This happens over and over and over again. In Florida, they plant these plants that last for a couple of months and then they dig them out and plant them again. So there's a large carbon footprint in producing the plants. And many of these plants are poisoned with neonicotinoids. And so they don't serve any purposes in the landscape, and they deplete the soil, and they've got a large carbon footprint. So we have to stop doing the seasonal plantings and put in long-lasting perennials or self-seeding annuals, and something that is going to leave the soil undisturbed for longer. And when we weed, we can reduce the soil disturbance by pulling them gently or by cutting off those that are annuals so that we don't pull them up at all. And you'd use organic mulch to cover open soil. But again, you would plant more plants more thickly so that you don't really need much mulch at all. Don't use weed barrier cloth. It doesn't work for weeds, and it makes a mess when you try to pull it up, and it disturbs the toads and the other soil living organisms, and it just is a mess. So again, the only thing I use weed barrier cloth for now is to keep rocks from the soil. That's it. And there's a lot of different ways that you can design your landscape to save energy, to be fire wise, to be water wise, to be flood wise, so that you can make good decisions about how your plants are placed in comparison to your house and to other features in your landscape. And fire is factor in Florida, and there's ways that you can have a fire-wise landscape. So you'd have a clearing around your buildings of 30 feet, so you would not have foundation shrubs and stuff like that. So if you're in a fire risky area, you want to keep it clear of plants and fences that are covered that go up to your house, because they would act like a fire wick. You want to, for 30 to 60 feet, you would remove lower branches and the vines and stuff, so that if a ground fire came in here, there'd be very little to burn. And shorelines, there's all kinds of things that we can do in our shorelines. The next book I'm working on with Marjorie Shropshire is living shorelines for Florida. So we've just turned in the book proposal. So that's what we're working on to make landscapes more resilient. And this is a picture I took of somebody's yard in Seattle, and no lawn. So there's lots of things that you can do with herbaceous plants that make it much more resilient. And again, don't buy those plants. And native gardens, here is the High Line in New York City. It looks like you're on a meadow walk and stuff like that, but it was built on an elevated train platform, abandoned train platform, and they have wonderful design. Pierre Ordorf was actually it's Pete Ordorf was the planner of that. Now, he also did the Lurie Garden, and he designed it so that it looked like a natural native area when it's not. It's in the middle of an urban area. But this native feature in the middle of, on the west side of Manhattan, has upgraded the whole side of Manhattan. And it just has been an economic boon to the whole area. So support your Native Plant Society, because we're the ones that are making native landscapes the new normal. Remove invasives. I just did an article in my blog about why invasives are so bad. And in Florida, we spend $54 million every year removing invasive plants. So removing invasive plants is important. And you can go to my blog to find that. This is my most recent one. We need more trees in the urban areas, and we need more green roofs, and we need more cool designs. And we covered the whole area about, and here's the High Line again. We covered much more about how urban areas can be much more welcoming to pollinators and to birds. And here's another surprising thing: growing food is a climate-wise action. So every pound of food that you grow offsets up to 2 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is an important part of climate-wise landscaping, is growing more of your food, having food forests, so that our food is more local. This is a community garden in Massachusetts, but these are my edible beds here. So I use raised beds, but I don't use any sides, and I've got lots of things. But what you want to do is you use raised beds, because that way you're not disturbing the soil underneath. Grow more woody crops. Hydroponics uses 1/3 of the water of plants that are grown in the ground. So more resiliency there. And then outside of your garden, support your local CSAs and farmers markets, and you can eat some of the native plants. This is a meadow garlic, Allium canadense, which is native to, that's probably not native to your area, but Central Florida, north. So I grow this in my garden now, and it really loves the nice rich soil that I make for my edible beds. But don't eat the weeds if you're not sure of the identities, because there's some very poisonous plants out there. So something that looks like a wild carrot could be water hemlock or something that's extremely poisonous. And we have a whole chapter on materials. So why is green landscaping important? Is because while each of us doesn't seem like what we do in our yard is important, there's millions and millions and millions of landscape managers. And so we can make a difference, and we can and should help future generations by with climate-wise landscaping. This is the website for our book. climatewiselandscaping.com, and there's more information there and some reviews and stuff like that. But here's another topic. Marjorie and I have a PowerPoint slideshow that's free. It's downloadable from the FNPS website. It's a 10-minute presentation on why native landscapes are important. And this is for you to use. There's a script. It's about 10 minutes long. For you to use for your HOAs or garden clubs or your municipalities or whatever. So if you're looking for content and you want people to do native plants, this is available to you at no charge. So go ahead and do it. And my one special, which we talked about, is that I have my book available. I'd have a special price just for you guys today. The list price of this book is $29.95. For $20, I will sell it to you and include the shipping. So this is a special deal on this book. So send an email to me, gstibolt@gmail.com, with your credit card number, your 3-digit code, the secret code, your zip code, and your name and shipping address. And I will use my Square point of sale system to put this in. But I'm going away for 10 days. So I won't get to it for 10 days, but the book is available. There's a lot of stuff in it, and it's well designed. New Society Press did a very nice job in designing the book. So there we go. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Ginny.
You're welcome.
And we do have a few questions.
Oh, good.
Let's see. First one came in from Kathy Benz. She asked about coonties. With the use of coonties expanding so much, is there a potential for the introduction of the butterflies that use them to be introduced more widely?
I don't know how far north the Atala butterfly will go. It should go as far as you are. It's not going to be up here. We have cooties up here, but we don't have the butterfly. I'm in Clay County, just southwest of Jacksonville. But yeah, the coon, the story of the coonties is that it's also called arrowroot. And it was over harvested from the wild and used to make animal crackers. And so the arrowroot makes the animal crackers sort of slimy. So it was harvested out of the wild, but it grows so slowly that it almost exterminated the population, and the Atala butterfly almost went extinct because it needs the coonties.
Right. Jay Mack asked early on when you were talking about wildflowers in your yard, do you sow wildflower seed?
Yes, of course. I do that, and I also use plants. So, and then I have some, like a tropical sage, reseeds itself, and I transplant those to other places when they're in my vegetable garden and stuff like that, and I don't want them there, then I put them out into the meadow wildflower areas. So I do a lot of transplanting of volunteers, but I also buy new plants from vendors, and it's interesting. I bought some Liatris back 7 or 8 years ago and planted it, and it was there, but then all of a sudden I ended up with an ironweed that had never been there before. So I assumed that it came with the wildflower
Bonus
that I bought.
Yeah. So Jay Mack also says on the Atalas, back to the coonties and their butterflies, that in Palm Beach County, they are abundant. So they weren't a few years ago, were they? That's
No,
really
no,
cool.
they were almost extinct, and Roger Hammer is probably responsible for bringing him back, because somebody had asked about it, and he told them they were in Biscayne Bay, and they weren't, they were somewhere else. So he did a heading off of that. He wrote an article in the Palmetto. I think it's one of the free Palmetto articles, because it was years and years ago that he wrote it. But he was very instrumental, at least according to him, in bringing back that butterfly.
And I know that Fairchild Tropical Gardens started a pollinator project similar to what Pam Callender is going to show us on Saturday, where they were getting folks in their backyard to plant cooties in corridors so that coontie patch to coontie patch, the Atalas could get from here to there. So,
and that's just one story. There's all kinds of stories with natives being more widely planted now because of FNPS and other groups that are bringing back some pollinators that had been on the brink.
Yeah. So then Holly Vincent asks, are there lawn and garden service companies in Sarasota that follow these principles that you were talking about earlier with using the right tools and that kind of thing?
I don't know, Sarasota. I'm in Clay County,
Well, I'm wondering if anyone here might know. I would imagine there are, but
yeah, I mean, you can specify, even if it's a mow and blow organization, you can say, I'm not paying for any chemicals, just mow it and mow it less often. So you can dictate, come only every other time. Don't come in the winter.
Good point.
You are the customer. You can request these things. They don't, and tell them not to worry about the blue-eyed grass that grows in there and the extra fog fruit that you get in there. Don't worry about it, just mow it. But you are the customer. You get to decide what happens.
Good point. Absolutely. So Aaron Schoenberg asks, if the potted tree roots were never rinsed and opened, like you mentioned, should one consider going back to do this? And if so, how long after planting could one consider this still an option, or how could one amend the tree roots post planting? I'm totally guilty.
Yeah, I mean, it's so counterintuitive, although I did write about it in Sustainable Gardening for Florida in 2009. I did write about it back then. Yeah, the one thing that you want to do is to make the soil richer outside of the planting hole. So you don't do any amending in the planting hole, but you can put a top dressing of compost outside the planting hole so that the roots will go out there, because you don't dig it in, you just do a top dressing. And then the next time you do it, 3 or 4 months later, it would be a little bit wider. And then next time you do it, a little bit wider. So what you are doing is enriching the soil outside of the planting hole so that the roots will go out, because that's where the good stuff is. So, that would be the best way to encourage the roots to go out. I wouldn't dig something up if it's been in the ground for a couple of years. I wouldn't do it. But do keep an eye out for the circling roots, though, because some of them will come up to the surface. And make sure that your root flare is above the ground level, because the trees will live longer. The root flare is above the ground.
Interesting. All right. Thanks for that. Holly Elmore asks, and I'll send her an answer because she had to bow out, but can she send, she asked if she could use Zell instead. Do you use Zell?
If you could use what? I didn't hear
it. Zell, I think it's pronounced Zell. It's a type of PayPal kind of thing. So I'm guessing you don't have that if you don't know what it is.
No, so, I don't know.
Yeah, I will let her know. On the water transfer, Eric Garduno asks, isn't there an important role for shrubs under the trees as well?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there is. Yeah, you'd want a grouping. You'd want a grouping of plants around the trees. So you don't want to have a tree in a lawn all by itself. You want to have a grouping of trees and shrubs, and then bunching grasses and ground covers so that there is a whole little ecosystem. So I have an illustration that Marjorie did for me in the art of maintaining a Florida native landscape, where I have a magnolia tree that was plunked in the middle of the yard, and what do you put around it? So you would take the lawn away, and then you would put other acid loving plants around it, including blueberries and other plants. But when you are planting them, don't dig into a thick root. So you would want to feel around to make sure that you're not cutting main roots of your lawn tree. But yeah, you'd want groupings, and the shrubs are important as understory plants. But
Okay.
I think shrubs are so ubiquitous as foundation plants, and that's the worst place for them because they just never stay small. I have foundation plants that came with our house. It was the male Yopon holly. It never has berries. It looks sort of like a typical boxwood hedge, and they're supposed to stay small, but they got huge.
The tree. So Eric also asks, is there any concern of food forest plants escaping gardens easily and becoming an invasive plant or weed? Are there particular food plants we should be worried about?
If you're worried about a plant, look in the plant atlas. Look it up in the plant atlas and see how many counties it's been vouchered in. Because let's take perennial peanut, for instance, as an example. It's widely touted as a Florida friendly plant. I mean, it's not a food forest plant. It's widely touted as a Florida friendly plant, but it is not native. But it is now found in more than 15 counties growing wild. So my fear is that the perennial peanut is possibly going to become invasive, but yet it's still on the Florida friendly list. So what you would do is look in the plant atlas, look up the plant that you're worried about, see how many counties it's found in Florida. If it's not found in the wild, then I wouldn't worry about it. But if it is, then don't. So the permaculture groups often are so human oriented that they don't worry about invasive plants. And so they're growing things like taro, which is invasive in Florida. So if we're going to be responsible citizens, then we would not plant invasive plants, even if you can eat them.
Good point. Thank you. And thanks, Eric, for bringing that up. Linda Goen asks, the HOA provides us a list of plants to plant. Does anyone review this list to make sure that native plants are included? Are landscapers knowledgeable about native plants?
That's up to us. We have to be better ambassadors for native plants. And that's one of the reasons that Marjorie and I did that PowerPoint, is so that you and everybody else can go out there and say, but look, we need more natives. I just posted something on Facebook this morning about on North Carolina. North Carolina just passed a bipartisan law that native plantings will be used in roadsides in North Carolina.
Awesome.
Yeah, so if you look at my post on Facebook. If you look at my timeline, I just posted, I said, if North Carolina can get this done, Florida can get this done.
Right. Let's work it. So I did put the link, if you go, scroll up the chat, right under where I put climatewiselandscaping.com is the actual link for the, to get to that PowerPoint on the, it's actually a PDF, so you don't have to have PowerPoint on the website. So,
But it's a PDF that downloads, but if you
Right.
open up the PDF, there is a link to the actual PowerPoint.
cool. All right.
So Shirley did not want to put the PowerPoint directly on there. So you get the PDF so you can get the whole thing and look at it, decide whether you want it. But then there is a link to the actual
You get the
PowerPoint.
PowerPoint. Great. Okay. All right. I'm just coming back to Holly's email about Zelle. I'm wondering, could they send you a check since you're going to be gone for 10 days if they're afraid to send you the credit card information over the internet?
You can send a check if you want. My mail is stopped, so that's okay. It's my address is 208 Bush Court.
As in BUSH?
Yes, of course, I'm
Okay.
a botanist, so I'm on Bush Court. Green Cove Springs.
Ah,
I thought that was cool to have Green Cove Springs until I had to write it out over and over again.
Was it?
32043.
All right, I'm going to write, and I'll put Ginny on here. Okay, so it's in the chat if you want to mail $20 and make sure you include your mailing address so she can
Right, yes.
and tell her why you're writing. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah. But you know, you can send the stuff to me in 2 emails if you want. So, you know, you have different things, and I'll put it in my square. And in 10 days when I get back, I'll fulfill all of the requests.
Okay.
But it is a good deal.
Yes. Yeah, it's a $30 book, and she's including
Yeah.
postage. It's a great book. All right. Sean Patton says HOAs are preempted by the state from banning native plants.
But they're preempted by Florida friendly plants. So it's a Florida friendly law, and native plants would be part of that. But the law is Florida friendly. Now, my problem with Florida friendly is that only half of the plants that are on that list are natives. So I think it's up to us to help get that changed so that it would be a higher number of native plants on the Florida friendly list.
Yeah. He also says their lists are non-binding and legally unenforceable, but that doesn't mean it won't be a legal nightmare. That said, work with your HOA to avoid trouble, but they should not be able to stop it.
Right. And you know, the big thing about living in a community is that you'd want your landscape not to look overgrown. So, and I talk about this at length in various of my other writings, is that you want a clean edge of some kind. So you'd have a bunching grasses, muley grass or Elliott love grass or something like that along the edge of your wildflower area, paths and benches that go through it. So it looks like you did it on purpose. And the other part of that is some outreach so that you could get one of the fan signs that says native plants. And I think actually it would be really cool if FNPS had, you know, native plants keep the, are important, you know, or wildlife is welcome in this, this area. So that a little bit of outreach, I think, makes a difference. But you'd want your landscape to look neat and not messy, and that way you have a lot more friends in your neighborhood.
Okay, very helpful. Kathy Benz goes back to the Atalas and asks who would be interested in introducing him here. And Sean replied that he's seen threatened hair streaks in his yard from planting native plants.
Yep.
So really, if you have a diverse native community in your landscape and get others to do the same, just having the plants can be enough for them to come eventually. Although the Atalas may need more because they need connection.
Yep.
And we need to check their actual native range as well. I'm not sure. Does anyone know if they were here in the past? Because I know South
Yeah,
Florida.
you'd need to contact Roger Hammond. He's the one who knows.
Okay. Or Fairchild Tropical Gardens, they know for sure.
Yeah, they would know too.
Carol Hoffman asks, is there an alternative to poison for getting rid of fire ants? Boiling water.
Boiling water, yeah, it's not poisoned, but it don't put it next to a plant that you care about because it will kill the roots.
Right. We had
Only for ants that are in an area that have plants that you don't care about.
Yeah. Well, we had them in a big muley area in the gardens at the celery fields, and the muley was already so well established, and the fire ant mound was so high that it was during the rainy season. I think I poured 7 or 8 kettles. That the mound was that big. It was off in a corner, and didn't bother the muley, but we did get the fire ants. So
that's good.
Yeah, and that's what they use at what is it? The school district. That's how I learned about it. School districts use it because they can't use poison. So, all right. Okay. So
Okay.
Tom Heitzman says he thinks they'll make their way up here with all the Kunti everywhere. I hope he's right.
Yeah.
So, all right. Okay. All right. Any other
Thanks for
questions?
having me, Karen.
Yeah.
And
We are really happy to have you, and those of you who signed up for the field trip, thank you. It's full, and we will be sending. I haven't sent the information out yet. I'll be getting that from Pam, and so you will get your field trip information if you're on the list about Wednesday. And yeah, join us next month. Who's our speaker next month? Do I have it? I don't have it open. Let's see. No. So I forget. I'm sorry. We'll send you an email. You'll get it. Keep an eye out for your email. And we're getting lots of thank yous in the.
Well, you're most welcome, and we need to make natives the new normal. So we need to work together on that. I hope to see a whole bunch of you up in Jacksonville in May.
I will definitely be there if things things All right. Well, thanks everyone. And I will be putting this up on our Serenoa YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So this will be, you can watch it again or share with your friends. So thanks, Ginny. Have a great camping trip.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. All right, I'm going to end it unless you have anything else. All right, take care.
Thanks.